competitor companies cost them 65% to copy an innovation that it cost the first company to do the research. But that's just the direct marginal costs. On top of that, the competitor company needs to have invested the sunk costs in employing the scientists and technologists and researchers and engineering facilities and labs in the first place. And on top of that, it had to equip those scientists with budgets so they can go to conferences, budgets so they can actually read journals and subscribe to journals, and indeed with their own research projects. Because if you're not doing research in that field, you simply cannot acquire the information of another paper because you're not actually equipped to read that paper. Because much of the knowledge is, of course, tacit knowledge. Add the direct marginal cost of acquiring an innovation from a competitor company, which is mainly the tacit knowledge of just rediscovering with your own hands, literally how it works, to the sunk costs of employing the scientists in the first place and the research projects they have to do so they can understand the field, and the cost of copying, not surprisingly, work out as 100%, because that's the equilibrium position you'd expect actually in an economy. You'd expect an economy to titrate itself such that the cost of copying would be the same as the costs of innovation, because otherwise no one would innovate. And to use a circular argument, companies spend a great deal of money on innovation, up to 3% of GDP actually. My understanding of how to operate this remote control is not in any way affected if you have the same understanding, and I can't stop you acquiring that understanding. So to that extent, it's non-rivalrous and non-excludable. But in practice, it may potentially be non-rivalrous, but actually to access it costs as much as to have produced it in the first place, and so it behaves as a private good in practice. And in this book, I came up with a new concept. I'm not boasting, I'm just saying how I came around this problem, and I called it an invisible college good, by which I mean that science and practice is organised in invisible colleges. This is a term, I didn't forge that term, it's a term that's been around in the sociology of science for 50 years. But scientists form themselves in these invisible colleges because science, of course, in practice, is based on trust. Science is just like the market, by the way. And actually, that's what peer review in science is all about. It's structures based on trust by which people who know each other personally or by reputation can foster grants and publications and all the rest of it. They're called invisible colleges, and they're completely separate from each other. Physicists talk to each other, biochemists talk to each other, they have nothing in common. And that's why I call it invisible college good. And within the invisible college, science is indeed non-rivalrous, non-excludable. But the costs of accessing the non-rivalrous and non-excludable things are as high as discovering them. And by the time you have first mover advantage, the person who makes a discovery first has a monopoly on that discovery until finally the competitors get there, shows that in fact the innovator has enough time to exploit his or her discovery before the competition gets there. But when the competition does get there and does copy, which they do eventually, it's a jolly good thing. The last thing you want is a series of monopolists. Science is almost perfect in the way it works. The inventor has a monopoly. This monopoly encourages him or her to exploit the discovery profitably. But with time, the monopoly is lost, because the innately non-rivalrous and non-excludable nature of science means that eventually the competitors catch up, although it costs them a lot of money to get there, and when they do catch up, you're no longer in a monopoly, and the society therefore benefits from the non-monopolistic nature of the science. And the time scales seem to work almost perfectly. If you really wanted proof of the existence of God, it's the perfect nature by which knowledge is distributed in a free market. Because only God could have got it just so perfectly with material property rights, which, of course, are the only way you can preserve investment in physical capital. Ideas, however, are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, actually. So there is actually an innate conflict. This is non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Giving a man or woman property rights in it is natural. It goes with, it's rivalrous and excludable. It goes with the innate nature of the object. There's very huge evidence that the greatest single cause of R&D is competition. The more competitive the industry, the more R&D people do. And the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, every study shows the more competitive an industry, the more people there are in an industry competing for the market, the more R&D they do.